basics.
Okay.
What exactly are polaritons? They sound like something straight out of Star Wars.
Well, they're kind of like a blend of light and matter, you see.
Okay.
When photons, those particles of light, interact strongly with excitons,
Right.
which are essentially electron-hole pairs in a semiconductor material,
Right.
they can actually form these hybrid quasiparticles called polaritons.
So it's like light and matter are doing this fusion dance, creating something totally new.
Exactly. And you know what's really cool is these polaritons, they can actually form Bose-Einstein condensates, or BECs.
BECs are.
Imagine a huge crowd of people all suddenly moving in perfect unison. That's kind of what's happening with polaritons in a BEC.
So is this BEC like the starting point for our supersolid?
It is,
Okay.
precisely.
Nice.
Now, to create the supersolid, the researchers built a photonic crystal waveguide. Imagine like a tiny channel for light, but with this really intricate pattern etched into it.
So they were doing some super delicate engineering on a microscopic level.
Absolutely. And they made this waveguide out of a specific semiconductor material with these little pockets called quantum wells embedded in it.
Okay.
Those wells are crucial because they help confine the excitons and make it easier for the polaritons to form.
Gotcha. So we've got our stage set with this intricately designed waveguide.
Yeah.
Now, how did they actually make those polaritons become a supersolid?
Well, they use this technique called optical parametric oscillation, or OPO.
OPO. Okay.
Essentially, they shone a laser onto the waveguide, and this pumped energy into the system and eventually led to the creation of a BEC of polaritons.
So they're using lasers to kickstart a polariton party.
Yeah, you could say that, but here's the thing. It wasn't your average polariton BEC.
What do you mean?
It formed in this special state called a bound in the continuum state, or BEC state for short.
BEC state.
Yeah, imagine like a VIP area where those polaritons can hang out without losing a lot of energy.
So this BEC state is key to keep things stable.
Exactly. And as the BEC in the BEC state grew stronger, something really interesting happened. It began to spontaneously emit pairs of polaritons.
Pairs.
Each pair shooting off in opposite directions with equal momentum.
Like a microscopic game of pool with polaritons.
Haha, perfect analogy. And these pairs, they weren't just randomly scattering, they were specifically going into two other energy levels within the waveguide called TE1 modes.
TE1 modes, okay, why are those important?
Because this whole process with the BEC spitting out polariton pairs into these specific energy levels, it actually breaks what we call the system's translational symmetry.
Translational symmetry, what's that?
It means that instead of the polaritons being evenly distributed everywhere, they start bunching up in this specific pattern.
Wait, so they create a pattern just by emitting these polariton pairs in opposite directions?
Precisely. And that pattern, that density modulation, is a telltale sign of crystallization.
Crystallization. So that's our solid aspect covered.
Exactly.
But remember, a supersolid also has to be superfluid, meaning it can flow without any resistance. So I'm guessing that's where things get even more interesting.
You guessed it.
Okay, so how did they actually observe this crystallization happening? Did they have some super-powered microscope?
Well, they use this clever technique called off-axis holography.
Off-axis holography, huh?
It's actually similar to the principle behind those 3D images you see on credit cards.
Oh, yeah.
But in this case, they used it to create an image of how the polaritons were distributed within the waveguide.
And what did they see?
They saw a clear periodic pattern, the density modulation we were talking about.
So they could actually see the evidence for this crystallization.
The polaritons were bunching up in a very specific way.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
But wasn't the modulation pretty faint?
It was, yeah, only about 2.6%, but because of those low energy losses in the BEC state, the pattern was still clearly visible.
So they've checked the solid box.
Yeah.
But a supersolid also needs to be a superfluid, meaning it can flow without resistance.
Yeah.
So how did they prove that this system wasn't just a static crystal?
They used a method called interferometry to show that the system was coherent, meaning all those polaritons were essentially moving in sync like a perfectly choreographed dance troupe.
So they're not only forming a crystal-like structure, they're also moving together in perfect harmony. It's like a quantum ballet.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And what's even more impressive is that they observed both local and long-range coherence, which means this supersolid behavior extended across the entire Bose-Einstein condensate.
So we've got confirmation. It's both a solid and a superfluid. This polariton supersolid is the real deal. But what makes it so unique compared to other supersolids out there?
Well, one fascinating feature is its non-rigid modulation.
Non-rigid modulation.
Yeah, meaning the spacing between those peaks in the density pattern, that crystal lattice, isn't fixed. It can actually shift and change depending on how strongly the polaritons are interacting with each other.
Hold on, so unlike a typical solid where the atoms are locked in a rigid structure, this supersolid can adjust its configuration. It's like it's squishy.
Haha, that's a great way to think about it. It's definitely different from what we usually think of with solids. And the researchers actually observed this shifting behavior as they increased the laser power, which boosted the interactions between the polaritons.
So the more they cranked up the energy, the more the polaritons interacted, and that changed the spacing of that crystal lattice.
Precisely. And this particular behavior connects to this really fascinating concept in superfluidity called rotons.
Photons. Okay, now we're really getting into the weird world of quantum physics. What are those?
Think of rotons as like a type of excitation that can ripple through a superfluid. There are like tiny waves or disturbances propagating through that sea of synchronized polaritons.
So are you saying that this non-rigid, squishy behavior of the supersolid is somehow related to these roton waves?
That's exactly what the researchers believe. This non-rigid modulation seems to be very similar to how rotons behave, and the system could be a powerful tool for studying these excitations in way more detail than we ever could before.
Wow. It's amazing how much complexity is packed into something so incredibly tiny. It's mind-boggling to think about all of this happening at a microscopic level.
Yeah.
But you mentioned another feature that makes this supersolid special.
Yes, another key difference is that this polariton supersolid exists in what we call a driven-dissipative system. This makes it different from those supersolids created in ultracold atomic systems.
Driven-dissipative. It sounds pretty intense. Can you break that down for us? What does it mean in this context?
So imagine a car engine. You need fuel to keep it running, but it also releases heat as a byproduct.
Okay.
In a similar way, this polariton system is constantly being energized by the laser, but it's also losing energy through light emission. It's a continuous flow of energy in and out.
So it's like a balancing act between driving the system with the laser and dissipating energy as light. That sounds like a much more dynamic environment compared to those isolated ultra-cold systems.
Exactly. This driven dissipative nature makes it more complex and challenging to study, but it also makes it potentially way more relevant to real-world applications.
Now that you mention applications, this is where I really start to get excited. Why should we, the listeners, care about this polariton supersolid? What are the implications of this discovery?
Well, this research opens up this whole new platform for exploring the quantum world. Photonic systems like this are remarkably controllable and tunable. We can actually tweak various parameters and explore regimes that wouldn't even be possible with ultra-cold atomic systems.
So it's like having this quantum physics playground where you can actually adjust the rules of the game.
Exactly. And by experimenting and playing in this quantum playground, we can gain a much deeper understanding of the nature of quantum matter.